It was supposed to be a carefree summer day at the lake, a moment of joy for a young black girl named Mia and her family. But everything changed in an instant. As Mia struggled in the water, gasping for help, the nearby police officer, someone sworn to protect and serve, stood frozen, his judgment clouded by prejudice. Her father, James, desperately pleaded for action, but his cries fell on deaf ears. The unthinkable happened, and Mia's life was tragically cut short. James, heartbroken but determined, refused to let her death be in vain. He embarked on a relentless quest for justice, exposing deep flaws in a system meant to uphold fairness and equality. His fight ignited a nationwide conversation, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths. But would his courage and determination be enough to bring change? Stay tuned as we unravel this powerful story of loss, resilience, and justice. The old house had stood at the edge of the village for as long as anyone could remember, its windows like dark, hollow eyes watching over the narrow streets. Most avoided it, casting nervous glances as they hurried past. But for Emma, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. She couldn't shake the feeling that the house held secrets, ones that might explain the strange dreams that had haunted her since childhood. Her grandmother had often whispered stories of the house, tales of a family that vanished without a trace, and of whispers heard in the dead of night. Emma had always dismissed them as folklore, the kind of tales meant to keep children from wandering too far. Yet, as the dreams grew more vivid, she felt a pull she couldn't ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows, Emma found herself standing before the house, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. As Emma stood there, a chill ran down her spine, though the air was still. The house seemed to breathe, its old wooden frame groaning softly as if it were alive. She hesitated, glancing back at the village, where the last remnants of daylight were fading. It would be so easy to turn around, to walk away and forget the strange pull that had led her here. But something deeper urged her to stay. Pushing open the rusty gate, Emma stepped onto the overgrown path. Each step felt heavier, as if unseen forces were trying to hold her back. The front door, once a vibrant red, was now faded and cracked. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The faint outline of furniture covered in sheets hinted at a life once lived here. As she moved further in, Emma noticed the faint outline of a handprint on the dusty floor, too fresh to belong to the past. Her mind raced. Was someone else here? Or was this another piece of the mystery that surrounded the house? She thought of the stories her grandmother told, of strange noises and shadows that danced in the moonlight. Emma's heartbeat quickened as she heard a soft creak from upstairs. Gathering her courage, she climbed the creaky staircase, each step echoing through the silent house. At the top, a door stood ajar, revealing a dimly lit room. Emma's breath caught as she saw a figure standing by the window, its back turned to her. The figure seemed familiar, yet impossibly distant, like something out of her dreams. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move, but the air grew colder. Emma felt a presence, something watching her, waiting. Suddenly, the figure turned, and Emma's world shifted. The face she saw was her own, yet different, older, warier, with eyes that held secrets she couldn't yet understand. The connection between her dreams and this house was undeniable, but the truth remained just out of reach, cloaked in shadows and unanswered questions. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as she stared at the figure, her reflection yet not her own. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows creeping closer, almost alive. Her mouth went dry, words escaping her grasp as she struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure tilted its head, mimicking her movements, but its eyes, those eyes, seemed to pierce through her, seeing everything she was and everything she feared. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door behind her, trapping her in the room. Emma spun around, heart racing, but there was no escape. The figure began to move toward her, slow and deliberate. Each step echoed with a hollow sound, like a distant drumbeat signaling something inevitable. Emma backed away until her heels touched the edge of the dusty bed. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure stopped, its lips curling into a faint, cryptic smile. "You know who I am," it replied, the voice a distorted echo of her own. Emma felt the weight of the words settle over her, each syllable carrying an eerie familiarity. Voices calling out to her. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Someone, or something, was coming, and Emma knew this was the moment everything would change. She braced herself, not knowing what awaited on the other side of the door, but certain that the answers she sought were closer than ever. The air grew thick with tension, every second stretching into eternity as the door handles slowly began to turn. The door creaked open, revealing not a shadowy figure or ominous presence, but a young boy, no older than 8, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. Emma's breath hitched. The boy looked familiar, like someone she had seen before but couldn't place. He stood there, shivering, his small frame dwarfed by the doorway, clutching a worn, tattered teddy bear. "Help me," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "They're coming." Emma's mind raced. Who was this child? How did he get here? Before she could ask, the boy darted into the room, hiding behind her as if she were his only shield against whatever pursued him. The air grew colder, the once faint whispers now a chorus of unsettling murmurs echoing through the house. Emma turned back to the figure, her own distorted reflection. It was gone. The room was silent save for the boy's labored breathing. She knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Who's coming?" she asked gently. He looked up at her, tears welling in his eyes. "The ones who took my family," he said, his voice barely audible. "They took them, and now they want me too." The boy's words sent a chill down Emma's spine. The stories her grandmother had told suddenly felt all too real. This wasn't just about her dreams or the strange connection to the house. There was something much darker at play. The house wasn't just a vessel for memories, it was a trap, a place where time twisted and reality blurred. A loud thud echoed from downstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she realized they weren't alone. Whoever, or whatever, was coming wasn't just a part of the house's past. They were here, in the present, and they were after the boy. Emma stood, pulling the boy behind her, her mind racing for a way out. The house felt like a maze, its corridors shifting, leading her deeper into the unknown. But she knew she couldn't leave the boy behind. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. As the footsteps grew louder, Emma tightened her grip on the boy's hand, determination surging through her. The house had its secrets, but so did she, and she wasn't about to let them win. The footsteps stopped just outside the room, and the silence that followed was deafening. Emma held her breath, her grip tightening on the boy's hand. The door creaked again, slowly opening to reveal a tall, shadowy figure. Its face was obscured, but its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. "You can't take him," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "He's not yours." The figure stepped forward, and as it did, the boy clung tighter to Emma. "You don't understand," the figure spoke, its voice deep and hollow. "He belongs here, just like you." Emma's heart raced as realization dawned. The house wasn't just a place. It was a prison for lost souls, trapping them in an endless loop. The boy wasn't a visitor. He was part of the house's dark history, and so was she. The dreams, the pull she felt. It was the house calling her back, reclaiming what was once its own. "No," Emma whispered, shaking her head. "I'm not staying, and neither is he." Summoning all her courage, she grabbed the boy's hand and bolted toward the door. The house seemed to fight back, the walls closing in, the shadows reaching out to stop them. But Emma pushed forward, her determination unyielding. She could feel the house trying to pull her under, but she refused to let it win. As they reached the front door, the figure reappeared, blocking their path. "You can't escape," it said, its voice now desperate. "This is your fate." Emma locked eyes with the figure, her own reflection distorted in its shadowy form. "Maybe it was," she said, her voice firm, "but not anymore." With a surge of energy, Emma flung the door open, and the cold night air rushed in. She pulled the boy outside, and as they crossed the threshold, the house shuddered violently, the shadows retreating. The figure let out a guttural scream, its form dissolving into the darkness as the house began to crumble. Emma and the boy stumbled onto the overgrown path, gasping for breath. Behind them, the house collapsed into itself, the secrets it held buried forever. The night was still, the village lights flickering in the distance. The boy looked up at Emma, his eyes filled with gratitude and a hint of sadness. "Thank you," he whispered. "What happens now?" The boy asked softly, his eyes reflecting the morning light. Emma smiled, ruffling his hair gently. "We start fresh," she said. "No more looking back, only forward." The boy nodded, his expression thoughtful. He stood, his small frame now steady and confident. "Thank you, Emma," he said, his voice strong. "For everything." With a final, lingering glance, he turned and walked down the hill, disappearing into the light. Emma watched until he was gone, then stood, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to create.